a motion to open the Board of Education meeting for October 19th of 2020?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
I'm in, Mary.
Mary, let's open the voting up, see who's available, and if they're not, we can have them vote over the internet.
Oh, I got it.
So Mary, whatever that last step was that you did, that's what allowed me to bring up the meeting scoreboard, just so we know for future reference.
Okay.
I haven't gotten the vote yet. I don't know if anyone else has.
I haven't
haven't.
either, Jordana.
Let's, while Mary's working that out, let's just vote orally. I'll vote aye to open the meeting.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye. Nay.
None opposed. Motion carries. Meeting would be open. So please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the
republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, moving on to public input number.
Oh, there you go.
There we go. We just got it.
Oh, perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
We know you're coming up to speed rather fast on this, so we appreciate all the efforts. And with that, we will move on to public input number 1. So if any members of the public that would like to ask the Board of Education or Administration anything and or make any statements or have questions, now would be the time to do it. You would have 2 minutes at this time. Please raise your hand or put something into the chat room at this time. And with that, Scott, do you see any hands?
Yes, one just popped up. We have Heather Hartstein.
Great. If you could let Heather speak, please, Scott.
Go ahead, Heather.
Heather, if you could just give us your name only, and you have 2 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, great. This is Heather Hartstein. I wanted to tag in this evening, and because what I wanted to say, I wanted to be, very direct, I wrote it down. So I think it'll just be better if I read it because it'll be quicker.
Sure.
As I sit in gratitude to the district, administration, and community, I sit in gratitude to all of you. All of my children are happy. I have 5, 4 are in district, 3 occupying all 3 buildings. As I watch the happenings in faraway districts and compare them to my own experience in Sag Harbor, I'm continually proud to be a part of this district. In my opinion, one of our district's great strengths is its open-minded and progressive nature. Along those lines, I offer to the board, administration, teachers, and parents the following for consideration. According to CDC guidelines, which I know we are following, rightly so, Sag Harbor's model of reopening falls into the, quote, some risk category on the continuum of risks. It's a 5-point scale, we're a 2. That's amazing that our model has kept us so safe. Thank you all. Continuing with the CDC guidelines in reference to masking, and please don't be concerned, I am not about to make a case for no masks at all. That's not what this is about. To quote the CDC website, I quote, appropriate and consistent use of masks is most important when students, teachers, and staff are indoors and when social distancing is difficult to implement or maintain, end quote. Therefore, my understanding of that is if you have a mask on, you do not need to socially distance according to the CDC. Now, here's my question. Most especially in the pre-KK Learning Center, but if successful after perhaps a trial, maybe with a single pod with parental permission, perhaps if the board decided to explore this, can we please discuss allowing the potted, masked 3, 4, and 5-year-olds who are at the start of their 6th successful week of school together to wear masks in their day as they are without the need to socially distance? This is my question. Why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing this up because, of course, I have a kindergartner who is very happy, and I'm so thrilled that he is. However, I feel that as a result of the guidelines that I know our district is so serious about following, I would just be so thrilled if we could continue to entertain moving towards a softly, less restrictive environment in appropriate steps and stages at appropriate ages, rather than going towards a more restrictive situation when I feel that our district has done such a phenomenal job of staying open. So I wanted to offer this, of course, mostly to the administration, the teachers, the board, obviously Mr. Malone, because he's running the 2 little schools, and I'm specifically referencing the Learning Center in this moment. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate that. And I think, and I'll just jump in before you do, Jeff, or any of the board members. I think a goal at some point during the school year would be any efforts we can do to return to a more normal situation that we had prior to this. In following or in looking at neighboring districts, I think our black letter following to the law in terms of, and the guidelines, has afforded us the ability to stay open and as safe as we are. So I would just be concerned, and I would defer to obviously the experts, that going into a traditional flu season and other complications where we're moving more activities indoors, that would be just a concern that I would have based on what I've looked at and what I've read, and the goal being to stay open to the fullest extent as long as possible. I think if there's any opportunity for us to incorporate what you've presented to us, which I think is great, I think we should look into that, but also with a cautious eye as to an ultimate goal of continuing to remain open. Would just be my thoughts. I don't know if any board members have any other thoughts, and or Jeff.
I can just chime in a bit. I think that Heather's correct in noting the CDC guidance, but it's important to note that as a New York State public school, we are following the guidance that's administered or comes down from the New York State Department of Health. And one of the things they're very clear on in their guidance documents is that we have to adhere to the social distancing 6-foot requirement. With regard to the masks, they strongly encourage the masks, but didn't mandate that masks be worn at all times. We as a district, noting the scientific evidence, decided to make that mandatory. But again, I don't read the guidance that's come down thus far as allowing us to exercise discretion with regard to social distancing. And that sort of segues into some comments that I'll make in my superintendent's report in a few minutes.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks.
Any members of the board wish to add anything at this point? No.
The only, I think, question that I have as we move forward in these issues come up is also that, we're in a district, particularly with younger children, where they may not always comply with the rules at any given moment. So you may have masks on children and their social distance, but at any given time, a 4-year-old can get up and run somewhere or take their mask off, right? So I just think that we have to understand that as difficult as it is, that if we're going to sustain what we're doing now, we probably have to err on the side of being cautious.
Thank you, Chris. Scott, are there any other hands up?
No, but there is a chat comment.
Okay, I will read that for Mr. Nichols. Question is, how is the tracing being handled with the student that tested positive for COVID?
Would
You
you
know,
like me to address that, Brian?
yeah, I mean, the DOH is handling that, but if you could just address that, that would be great.
So in any positive case, the Suffolk County Department of Health employs contact tracers who communicate with the school and collaborate, but we're supportive. We're not the entity conducting the tracing. The Suffolk County Department of Health is.
Great, thank you.
I
Any
don't
questions?
see any other comments or chat messages.
Great, any questions from the board or comments from the board at this point? Okay, seeing or hearing nobody, we would move on to item 5.1, the superintendent's report.
Yes. So before I start with my comments about recent developments, I do want to note that October 19th through 23rd is School Board Recognition Week. And School Board Recognition Week is sponsored by the New York State School Boards Association. And basically, it's their way of recognizing school board members for their volunteer service in support of the students who attend New York State public schools. So with that, Ms. Carriero and Mr. Malone worked with their students to put some videos together to thank the board members for your volunteer service. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Fisher, to play those videos.
Yep, just give me just a moment here to get it up, please. For some reason I'm having some trouble.
I hear we're getting a 20% raise this year.
Okay, there we go. Sorry, guys, hold on one second, please.
It says to me all the time.
It's good that it's asking for access from you, Scott, so we know we're in the right. We're in the right.
Yeah. Okay, we're getting there.
No.
Is there sound, Scott?
I'm sorry, what was that, Jeff?
Is there sound?
You're not hearing the sound. Okay, great. I'm hearing it on my side, and try one more time here. I'm sorry, are you hearing that now or no? I can't tell from my side.
No.
No.
All right.
Mr. Fisher, if it's going to take a while, then maybe my words of thanks will suffice for now.
I think let's try that, Jeff. We're learning a new world here of meetings, so this is great. Let Mr. Fisher work on that. And Jeff, if we could hear from you and then your report, that would be great.
Yeah. So moving on to my comments, I wanted to start by just saying that we had a practice COVID drill on Thursday, October 15th. So last Thursday, Ms. Carriero and Mr. Malone worked with their staff and basically did a drill where there was a hypothetical student in each building who tested positive, and they went through the process that they would go through with a normal positive test. And that really includes communicating with the Suffolk County Department of Health, and most importantly, filling out the forms that the Suffolk County Department of Health requires schools to fill out. And there are 5 forms, and I'll just give you a brief overview. One is the COVID case investigation detail form, which asks specifics about the case. The second form is a commute to and from school form that covers the transportation and who may have been exposed during trips to and from school. Third is the in-class activities and exposures for positive students. Number 4 is the same form, but for staff members. And number 5 are other activities and exposures, usually things outside of school. So it was good that we did that, because the very next day, on October 16th, Friday, we did have a case, a positive test case. And as per the notice that went out on the 17th, we did contact the Suffolk County Department of Health. Given the fact that the last day that the student was physically in a building was October 9th, the Suffolk County Department of Health deemed that no further steps were required on the part of the district. And as per my comments previously, the Suffolk County Department of Health is in touch with the family and is responsible for contact tracing. So they asked us some questions, we gave them the information, and they're doing what they have to do on their end. There were some comments earlier from Heather Hartstein during public input about perhaps relaxing the approach that the district is taking to the pandemic. And my comments that I had planned for my presentation pertain to some calls for the high school students to come back to school every day. There have been, some calls for that, not only in Sag Harbor, but in other schools as well. For those of you who don't know, our high school students can elect to study remotely or in person. And if they study in person, they essentially attend school 2 days per week and study remotely 3 days per week. I want everyone to know that unless the guidance is relaxed from the Department of Health, we physically do not have the space to accommodate more students. Right now, thankfully, we're able to house the students we have and keep them 6 feet apart, but bringing back another grade or grade levels would prohibit us from achieving that 6 foot distance that the Department of Health requires us to achieve. Later tonight, you're going to see a budget transfer on the agenda for $60,000, and I wanted to make a comment about that. It's a budget transfer into unemployment insurance. And basically, I wanted to let you know that the business office has stated that there are 2 categories that account for this increase in costs associated with unemployment claims. And the first is for employees that were being paid during the period, because as per the executive order, if you recall, employees were or employers were told to keep employees whole during the period covered by the executive order, meaning essentially that because school was not in session, employees were still getting paid. Those employees who put in for unemployment insurance, the district is contesting those claims, and we will receive money back totaling about $8,500. The other roughly $50,000 is to address an increase in unemployment claims due primarily to substitute employees, substitute teachers, substitute clerical, substitute custodians, people who, because of COVID-19, were not able to get paid, and they're entitled to that benefit. I also wanted to update you very quickly, that's my last update, that you'll hear from Ms. Carriero in her principal's report and from Mr. Bramoff in the athletic director's report about the fact that we are slowly reintroducing co-curricular activities and some off-season workouts for the athletic teams. And I just want to say the logic behind that is that because high school students are not able to be cohorted, and we've been over this multiple times, introducing co-curriculars or off-season workouts that are not able to cohort essentially doesn't pose the same amount of risk as it would for middle school or elementary grade level students who are cohorted for the most part during the day. So again, Ms. Carriero and Mr. Bramoff will provide some more detail, and you'll see some appointments tonight in the form of resolutions for co-curricular positions. But the thinking behind it is just what I said. So that does it for my superintendent's report. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions from the board for Mr. Nichols at this point?
Thank you for that update. At an earlier meeting, I think it was an earlier meeting, I had requested at an upcoming meeting to get a broader accounting of how we were tracking against budget and how we were tracking with additional COVID-related expenses compared to savings of things that aren't going on. I know that we're still early. I wasn't expecting it tonight, but if we could get that in the next month or so, if it's possible. I just think going into budget season, it will be really helpful to be able to reflect on that and at least be able to understand what it is now. And also if there's going to, if we're going to end up having additional costs that we anticipate, we may have to make some decisions with how we're spending our money in the rest of the year.
Sure.
Absolutely, Chris. I think that was important. I did pass that on to Jeff. The business department is working on that, and we anticipated having that for one of the November meetings.
I just want to make a comment too.
Go ahead, Al.
Go ahead, Alex.
I just wanted to say to Jeff and the administration, just what an amazing job you guys are doing, and just how wonderful it is to have all these kids back in school. Just speaking as a parent, my 3 kids, I not just academically, but just in terms of their mental health and happiness, I can't say enough how great it is that they've been back in school. And it's just, I know the enormous amount of work that went into the beginning and what continues to happen every day. So I just really appreciate it.
I have a question. So I understand, Jeff, that there is an issue with space for bringing the kids back full time. So I just like a consideration to be put on the table for thought for the future, hopefully the near future. If our numbers continue to stay where they are and not rise to a serious level, we had spoken earlier in the year about bringing in modular trailers so we could give kids more days at school. And the answer or the decision from the board and the administration was that we weren't sure that we were going to be able to stay open, and we didn't really want to spend that kind of money and be committed to an expense such as that. So I just think if we are leaning towards that moving forward, I think it's something that we should start to consider, even if it's 3 days a week for the kids versus 2 days a week. And I think it's important that we start to project long-term and if we stay on this role. So I want to just add that.
Great. No, I think that's important, Sandy, that we should look into that. And Jeff, if you could look into that and report back to us at one of our November meetings.
Happy to.
Thanks, Jeff.
And Jeff, if you would just, I know that the the governor's office, just with respect to the quarantining states and or countries for travel, and how the district will be responding in their morning or questionnaire that we fill out, that if you're coming back from a state or a country that does not require quarantine, we will be following the governor's directive, or how the school will be handling that.
Correct. So most people are aware that the majority of states in the United States are on New York State's quarantine list, meaning that if you travel to a state like New Mexico or Utah, or 30 or 40 other states, when you come back, you're supposed to quarantine for 14 days. What many people are not aware of is that those same quarantine requirements exist for travel internationally, with the exception, as of the end of last week, of 31 countries that do not appear on the quarantine list. So we are in the process. I worked with Mr. Fisher and Ms. Kriegsman to alter the questionnaire to accurately reflect the fact that the quarantine applies to both international travel and domestic travel as well, and to refer to the list for parents considering travel either domestically or internationally. Mr. Fisher, do you want to add anything?
No, well, sure. Yeah, the questionnaire should be updated by Wednesday or Thursday morning. They should reflect the new language. And ideally, I'll be able to include the links that reference the specific countries and states that are on the list, so that people can view that if they choose to.
Now, can I ask a question? If someone does decide, let's say, to go to Florida, because they have, like, God forbid, something happens in their family.
Sandy, I think we lost you.
We just lost you.
Are you back, Sandy? Sandy, if you could hear us, maybe you could.
I didn't hear that. My Wi-Fi went unstable of course, because I
No, we lost you. You had said Florida, and then we lost you.
Oh, I'm sorry. So if, let's say, someone has to go to Florida for an emergency and they come back and they have to quarantine for 2 weeks, are they taking their own time? We're no longer paying them. What is the governor's new? I know that there was guidelines that came down originally. Now it's changed. So I just want to.
So the original guidance up until mid-September was that if you traveled to, let's just say, Florida, for instance, and at the time of your departure, Florida was on the list, then when you came back, you were required to take your own sick time out of your own account. If you had traveled to, let's just say, Florida again, and while you were there, the state was added to the quarantine list, then you would not be charged that sick time. That changed in mid-September when a federal law came down that basically said that if you are subject to a COVID-19 related quarantine, and that would cover a New York State quarantine, then you were entitled to federal leave money capped at $511 a day for 10 days for a calendar year. So if, for instance, I was away and I came back and I was subject to quarantine, I could put in for a reimbursement through the federal act, but it would be capped at $511 per day, and a limit for 1 year would be 10 days total. And beyond that, I would be charged my days.
Okay.
Can I ask a Part B question to that?
I may not know
So,
the answer, but go ahead.
so Mr. Nichols, if an employee goes through that process, are they applying directly through another government agency, or does the district get involved at all in that process?
I haven't crossed that bridge yet. So when and if an employee puts in for it, I'll talk to our attorneys and get guidance as to how to proceed. But that is the framework within which we have to operate.
So it doesn't touch our budget.
Not to my understanding, no.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions from members of the board? Is there any questions? We'll open it up to members of the public viewing this specific to the update from the superintendent. Any hands, Mr. Fisher?
No.
No hands. I don't see anything in the chat room. Okay. If we can move on to item subsection 6, item 6.1, the principal's report.
Why don't we start with Mr. Malone?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. So I think I'll just echo some of the comments before. I'm pleased to report that things are going very well at the elementary school. It definitely was, it was a good start, and I think with all of the protocols in place, we're continuing to see a lot of success each day at the elementary school and at the learning center. Maybe the board will receive the gratitude video later on, but it sort of speaks to the fact that while protocols are in place that maybe limit some of the things that we know as normal during the school day, we're very pleased and we appreciate all the support that we've received, that the students still are experiencing a very robust program. The academic program each day is, very similar to what it's always been. And we're also making sure that they're experiencing the art and music, physical education, foreign language that is such an important part of our program. So, we really are grateful for all the support and happy that the program is what it is. There are things, however, that we have not been able to provide the students, most notably some of the after-school opportunities, as Mr. Nichols mentioned, clubs, after-school shape, which is a nice program for families that supports them. But we continue to work to keep some of the traditions alive at the elementary school. So tomorrow, for example, we did a lot of planning. I thank Mrs. Grant, the 5th grade teachers, and our phys ed teachers. We are going to do Project Adventure, which is a long-standing tradition for the children. It's a great team building program. They're going to safely walk down to Mashashamua Park, and the park actually opened up their facility for us, and they'll enjoy those activities. And then looking ahead, something that's on the minds of all the elementary children, Halloween is fast approaching. Halloween will look different than it normally does. We're not going to have our traditional parade, but Friday the 30th, we are going to definitely celebrate the fun of Halloween. Students will be welcome to wear costumes to school. And within the building, we have some fun activities planned for them. We think they're going to have a great time and still get to enjoy Halloween. So that's the principal's report at the elementary school.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Mr. Malone. So good evening, everyone. At the middle high school, we're busy trying to keep traditions alive with also the cohorting there. Next week will be the annual middle school Red Ribbon Week. Miss Westhoff's been working hard on that. Students will be introduced to it on Wednesday of this week. As Mr. Nichols mentioned, we are going to start clubs. It is a bare bones club offering so far because we wanted to ease into it. Our play director and play producer for the fall met with the students last week via Zoom, and they will be meeting at the end of this week or early next week to start the audition process. It's a cohort of about 10 children that are interested in the fall play. We are obviously going to move back the date of when the fall play will actually occur, and it will be socially distanced. We also are going to be offering, you're going to see a number of clubs in the high school. We, as Mr. Nichols said, we aren't cohorted, so we're able to have the students be together at a social distance, masks on, still following the same guidelines. The middle school clubs that you might see are usually for some of our learners that might need to find a home. So you'll see there's a virtual GSA, and there's also the Math Olympiad that will also be virtual. There is an addition this year because we want to provide extra support, and we know that that academic support period is a big, huge thing for our children, and we don't have it this year due to the staggered start time as well as the end of the day and how we staggered the dismissal. There are 4 homework clubs for the high school with each content area, and we're hoping that that will most likely be virtual, and then that the students will be able to be supported in those content areas. There's also different ways that we've been handling that. Mr. Guinan, myself, and Ms. Westhoff have been working on that. There's 2 different math labs we offer that with our teaching, and we've been talking with our teachers union about possibly flexing schedules to provide almost like a 0 period for different help in different content areas. As for every week, we have a social emotional learning check-in. We've noticed that it's very hard for our kids, right? This is not a normal situation. So there's a survey that goes to each cohort each week. And on Wednesdays, we have a meeting of the minds with administration as well as our guidance department to check in on those students and also to check in with every grade team. We're starting to plan a virtual parent-teacher conference. And our science labs, we're figuring out ways and new ways, as Mr. Malone said, it's thinking out of the box with teaching. And we're continually looking on reevaluating our schedule as we know it's not perfect in the high school. We worked on looking at each and every period and how many rooms that we can't accommodate at a social distance. So we have those numbers. It's about 10 per period. So we are working, we're constantly reevaluating and gaining feedback from people and trying to make it the best as we can in a not so great situation.
Great. And I
you.
do want to
So
call
happy.
in Mr. Bramoff for a quick update regarding off-season workouts and anything else you want to share, Mr. Bramoff.
Thank you.
Hi, greetings, everybody. As we said, well, we've been on hold at the section level since March. We've not held any practices or contests since March. I've been in contact with our neighboring athletic directors, mainly East Hampton and Bridgehampton and Southampton, our surrounding neighbors and our partners. We've all come up with our own individual plans for district. At this time, I'd like to request that we can provide a shared sports and an in-house sports opportunity for our kids to do voluntary off-season workouts in small groups. I have a pretty comprehensive list of what it is we're trying to do in terms of the standards and the policies and the protocols that we're going to have to follow. We took most of those guidance from directly off of the New York State website. And it's listed in a PowerPoint presentation that Mr. Fisher has that he'll be sliding through that the board can look at. Once the athletic season was moved until the starting on January 4th, we figured now it's time that we would probably have to start getting our students reacclimated to working with their coaches and working on their skill sets that would be requisite for participation once athletics do return. I've listed within the, and it's up on the slide right now, that is the new start dates for athletics. So we would be starting our winter sports season, January 4th. I'd like to request of the board in a nutshell that following the steps that I've outlined on the slides, that we begin voluntary off-season workouts, both inside, outside, and at our shared sports partners, beginning as soon as the board feels comfortable.
Great. Appreciate that, Mr. Bramoff. Are there any board questions for Mr. Bramoff, Mr. Malone, or Ms. Carriero?
I just had a question, and I realize probably Mr. Malone and Ms. Carriero cannot answer it right now, but after having gone to back to school night virtually, which was great, I got a sense from the teachers that they mentioned kind of that there was, of course, as expected, a bit of a learning loss from the spring, that because of the small class size, they hope to be able to make up pretty quickly. And I wasn't sure if at this point in the year, if like every elementary school student has been given, a reading assessment and the equivalent in middle and high school, and if we have any kind of sense, kind of more scientifically about where the district is in comparison to prior years. And if not, if we could get some sort of sense about that in the next like month or so, just to kind of have a better understanding about what the learning loss might have been.
Or it's something we could look into and circle back at a future meeting.
Yeah, that's why I said I had a
Yeah.
feeling no one can actually speak to it
Yeah,
specifically.
I think we could put that on the list. And perhaps, Jeff, you could coordinate with Matt and Brittany, and we can get an update to the board on that at a future meeting.
Sure.
I have a quick question. Brittany, you mentioned that there was weekly surveys going to the cohorts. I was just wondering at kind of a high level, was there any interesting learning or reflection that you could share with the board that we would find informative?
I think as a whole, I think our middle schoolers are doing great. I think our high school, I think for what we've talked about, so we have the meeting of the minds meeting every Wednesday, and it's our guidance and PPS staff as well as our administration, and we talk about the kids and we review that stuff. What we're noticing is for the introvert kids, they're fine with the setup, but for children that are extroverts, this is very difficult for them. And talking to teachers, the high school students almost, and this is qualitative data, just talking to people, they like to hide behind the mask, and it's not as interactive and as they want it to be, and collaborative learning. And also our teachers have to transition their type of instruction. As we know, we like to do an inquiry-based style of learning, which fits with the IB, and it's definite transition and learning curves with that. I have to say, and Mr. Guinan will, and Ms. Westhoff will say it too, it's actually great to see the younger teachers who are more comfortable with technology teaching the older teachers different ways to engage students. And there's a lot of that happening. And then also with those weekly check-ins, we get to see how each and every student is doing. And for lack of a better word, we have those virtual for even for our remote learners, because they feel so isolated. So it's like trying to figure out and engage them too. So that's overarching what's been going on from those surveys.
Thank you. And then my other question has to do with both the sports that we're introducing and the after-school activities, which is if students are electing to be remote academically, can they still participate in any of the in-person after-school activities we're implementing? And if so, then do they have a separate like check-in protocol in order to then enter the school to participate? Because once the other kids are in school already, obviously they've had their temperature taken and all that. So just curious about those two pieces.
So the answer, the first part of the question is yes. So a remote student would be eligible to participate in the co-curricular activities and the off-season workouts. With regard to checking into the building right now, the remote students are not required to fill out the questionnaire, the daily questionnaire, but if they elect to participate in co-curricular activities, they would. So they would be added to that list if they elect to participate, where they would have to fill that out, and they would have to take their temperature upon entering the building.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And just to close out, any other board questions?
I just had a question on the sports. Eric, are there kind of clear metrics as to, for the voluntary sports situations, kind of how many kids per area, masks, no masks? Like if you could share that with us, that not now, just send in an email or whatever, just so that we understand kind of what the protocols are that are going to be taken. I'd imagine, for example, like we don't want, one basketball team coming in the gym and then the next one coming in 5 minutes later. We probably want to let it ventilate and stuff like that, just like, the hospital does with its different hospital rooms. So stuff like that.
I'm sorry, can you hear me? As I outlined in the slides, we will be erring on the side of extreme caution.
we will follow the guidelines to the strictest letter of the law. So, for example, I don't foresee having more than 6 people inside a gymnasium at any one time. And so they could, and we would, and I'll probably meet with the superintendent quite frequently to, to get feedback from him and see which direction he wants to take it.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
I would say, Mr. Bramloff, you're getting a lot of positive feedback for your costume day at the Learning Center. I hear from everybody I see on the street, so they very much appreciate that, and it's a wonderful thing. So thank you. And
Well, if you have to wear a mask, it might as well be a superhero.
it's great. So thank you. And then I'll just close out this section with a chat room question for Ms. Carriero. The question is, anything for Halloween in the middle school?
Yeah, yes, there is. So for Red Ribbon Week, the last day, the kids get to dress up in their costumes. And Miss Westhoff's planning some type of challenge, but obviously we want to make it a surprise, but they will be able to dress up like we always do the last day of Red Ribbon Week.
Great.
In their costumes. And this year's easier because they have to wear masks.
Works well.
Brian, we do have a hand up again from Heather Hartstein. Are we still in public questioning?
Yeah, we'll take those questions with her. Yes, please.
Okay, go ahead, Heather.
Thank you, everybody. I just wanted to say, as a parent of a 10th grader, and I wanted to really support what Mr. Bramhoff brought to the board, urging them to very rapidly consider allowing this return following the guidelines, because the athletics has been out for these kids for 6 months. And as everybody knows, it's so vitally important to their emotional well-being. And I think that the sooner they can get back to it in any capacity would be amazing. And of course, I know that is coming from, my son directly. So I just wanted to really support that as a parent of a high schooler.
Absolutely. And I think the sentiment of the board is the same, as long as we can do it safely. Okay, so seeing or hearing no one else. Any other last opportunity for board questions with respect to this part of the agenda? Okay. We will move on to item 7, the consent agenda. Is there a motion for items 7.1 through 7.20?
So moved.
Second.
Very good. Any discussion? Seeing or hearing no discussion, Mary, I'd ask that you open up that for voting.
All votes are in, anonymous.
Great, thank you. Item 8, there are no items. Item 9, unfinished board business. So I did ask, this was a late addition to the calendar for the board. So this is the Board of Education calendar. There are a few dates coming up, such as budget workshops and or review that and are required by the board and or would require potentially moving a meeting or additional meetings. So Mary, as you and I discussed, if we could bring up those dates for the board, we could have a board discussion, and then the board could email me in terms of dates that work. Specifically, the first one with respect to the May meeting, Mary, we currently have a meeting scheduled for, if you could just explain that to the board.
Um,
I'm just trying to pull my calendar up. So we currently, just as an example, have our meeting scheduled for May 3rd, is a scheduled Board of Education meeting.
oh, yes. The board needs to have a budget hearing, and that date range has to be a week or two before the budget vote and election, which is May 18th. That time frame is May 4th through, I believe it's May 11th. So if the board were to not hold the business meeting on May 3rd, hold it a week later, May 10th, we would be within those guidelines of a budget hearing.
So that in discussion to bring to the board, I thought that would be the, an efficient way to handle that, to move that meeting 1 week, to be able to do the presentation and meet the requirements. As an example, are there any feedback from the board or thoughts from the board on that?
Brian, I don't have the meeting calendar in front of me. Are there 2 meetings already scheduled in May? Board
There are.
meetings?
May 3rd and May 24th are the 2 currently scheduled board meetings.
So we would be keeping the 2 meetings. We would just move one by a week.
Correct. We would move May 3rd to May 10th, and then our second meeting would be May 24th.
Makes sense to me.
And then I don't know if you wanted to address this, Brian, but you and I had discussed, and I think the board was in the loop on this, the notion of introducing the educational meetings once again for November, December, and possibly January.
That's correct. The board is in the loop on that. I think we should get to that in one moment. I know you have some ideas on that. Would the board be in agreement to move the May 3rd meeting to the May 10th? Let's start with that.
I'm fine.
Me too.
Good.
Yes.
Yes.
Alex?
Fine.
Jordana?
Yep.
Okay, so I would request, I would, is there a motion to move that meeting from May 3rd to May 10th?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Correct. Mary, if you could open up the voting, we can vote on that particular item, or we could vote, let's vote orally. Aye.
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 Okay,
Aye.
great. All in favor. So Mary, if you could update the calendar to move that meeting.
Yep.
Our next point on calendar, I know it's out there, but May 18th is the budget vote and election. We need to schedule a meeting for that night as well. Any thoughts or comments from the board on that?
Is that going to be a meeting just where we're accepting the
Correct.
results?
Yeah, correct, for the budget results.
Okay.
Just out of curiosity, when did that become a thing?
Yeah, we didn't used to do that.
I could look into that and I could circle
Well,
back.
that's all right. I'm good.
Yeah,
I can do that for you, Brian. I can look into that.
great. Thank you,
Thanks,
Mary.
man.
I think either last year or the year before was the first time in my tenure that we did it. So I don't know if the law changed or we weren't complying with it or we're confused. It was one of those 3 boxes.
I think it
I
also
think-
for the fact that we had to swear some people in immediately. in order
Exactly.
That we had to have.
Yes.
Right. But if we don't have to swear anyone in immediately, then
Don't
is
need
there,
that meeting.
there's no reason to have the
Right, so
meeting,
we'll-
correct?
We'll hold on that.
My
Just-
understanding is that the law is that you have to have a meeting to accept the results within 2 days. So that's the other reason.
so
All right. Well, maybe we can just confirm that
Yeah,
if either of those things
look into
exist
that.
this year.
I'll look into that and I'll circle back to the board on that.
Thank you.
In terms of, let's move on to Jeff, if you would, the 3 topics for the 3 educational meetings that we're proposing from starting in November.
Yeah, so these
For
ideas
everyone's-
come from,
Just for everyone's knowledge, those meetings, the board meetings in November are the 2nd and the 16th.
so I spoke to the administrators about ideas that they thought would be worthwhile for educational presentations, and they came up with 2 ideas for November and December. And the first was an update on remote learning, things that we've done differently, things that we've learned, things that we are planning to change moving forward. And the second topic was diversity and inclusion, which was an important board goal. What have we done as a district over the last year in terms of staffing, educational materials, what's taking place in classrooms. And the third topic that I had been thinking about was sort of similar to what Jordana brought up, which was, what has been the impact collectively of basically the last 7 months, and what is the plan moving forward for addressing that in terms of any necessary remediation. A realistic look of at where students are and what the school can realistically do to address any fallback or any loss of instructional time that students experienced as a result of COVID-19.
Feedback from the board on those topics.
I think they're great. And I'm glad the administrative team has come together and presented them to us. Very exciting.
Great. Any other board comments?
Sounds awesome.
And so the proposal would be to have the first meeting of the month. So for instance, in November, the November 2nd would be our business meeting, and the November 16th would be our educational meeting, subject to the will of the board.
Okay.
And Brian, I'm going to request that the formats of those meetings be more like workshops. I think we've done that organically a couple of times the past year, but we used to structure workshops that had very different rules of engagement. And I think it's good to kind of memorialize that if that's the will of the board, because it engages the public more.
Correct. We've tried to engage the public as much as we can this year in this format. So yes, the intent would be to have that as a workshop, to be interactive with the public as well as the board and administration and teachers that are presenting on the evening.
And I think with the Zoom meetings, the public definitely has an opportunity to engage and get involved.
We've had
Easier.
more impact.
Great.
Yeah. Yep. All right. So it sounds like
Brian?
somebody has a different opinion. If not, we could tell Jeff that that's the direction we'd like to proceed.
The only other request I would have is that if there can be, I'm assuming there will be, but if we can have some slides as material for these, because it'll be helpful just for the public and for us to reflect on it. And if there's anything that's data related that would be helpful to collect or share, that might be helpful as well.
Okay.
And then the last calendar item, and then we can move on, is we will have to set some budget workshops, either on the calendar or in addition to the meetings as we progress into November. We will set those dates with the first budget meetings starting in December. So just for the board to be aware of that, we'll look for dates, and I will be emailing for dates and or ideas for that.
Brian, can I just get confirmation on the educational meeting dates?
Yes. So the educational meeting dates will be November 16th
Okay,
and
that's on remote learning.
and December 21st.
okay,
And the third, Brian, if indeed we're following that 3-month window, would be January 25th.
That is correct.
Okay.
what about March?
We're going to just start to that date, and then we'll
Okay,
pick it up either prior to the January date from the board to see how it progresses, see how the school, where we are in the world, and how the school is progressing.
Good point.
okay.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Brian, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely, Sandy. Yeah.
Thanks. I just want to ask a favor. So we just adopted our board committees, and I'd like to get those started as soon as possible.
Yes.
But if I can ask, the letter that was sent out did not have 2 committees on it. Both are the new committees. I'd like to continue in the process of starting them, but I'd also like to reach out to the public to see if there's anybody that would be interested in being on the communications committee. Somebody possibly with communication skills might be able to come on and help us. And then the
Calendar committee.
Calendar committee, yes.
Yes.
Unfortunately, they were left out by accident, and I just want to make sure that the public is out there. If anybody wants to do it, maybe not. I mean, not stop the process, continue. Just make sure that we, we invite anybody who might.
Yeah. So we were doing those because those are newly created for this year. So we were establishing the existing, but that Mary and Jeff will be sending those out as well, and we will be looking to fill those at our next meeting. We wanted to get the standing committees established, and then we can move forward with hopefully having those meetings start their first meetings in November with virtual or otherwise.
Great, perfect. And they could just email the BOE@sagharborschools.org for you to answer, correct, Brian?
I'm sorry, if there's a question or in terms of.
No, if they want to be on it, they can just
So
email.
we had asked all those emails go to Mary Domchek.
Okay.
Just for collection.
Got
But
it.
the email will be going out to to everybody as it was for the previous boards.
I will do that tomorrow.
Great,
Thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Sandy.
Thanks.
And Brian, you mentioned, the hope that the committees have their first meeting in November. I think that's a really good goal to have, because I know that we had uneven committee meetings last year. So I think if we can be a little more mindful as we kick this off and monitor it closely during the course of the year, we'll probably have even greater participation.
Yeah, I think so. And I think since it's only October 19th and we established those tonight, it gives, 2 to 4 weeks for those committees to set up a first meeting. And with Zoom, there's more flexibility. So I do think that you're right, Chris, that should be the chair should look to schedule those meetings for November as soon as possible. Anything else from the board? Okay, moving on to.
Hey, Brian, I just had a question.
Yeah.
Are we is the district going to be a polling place on election day? And if it is, like what?
We are, and I can let Mr. Nichols weigh in on that.
And just the second half, if it was yes, like are there certain precautions we need to take, things we need to do?
So I actually objected to us being utilized as a polling place last spring, because ultimately what happened was other polling places closed, and without telling us, the elections board made our polling place the alternate. And so we had people coming from multiple polling places into our school, which from my perspective wasn't the safest thing, and we should have been given a heads up. So I called the Suffolk County Department of Elections and requested that, and put it in writing, that we not be utilized as a polling place on November 3rd without success. So we are going to be a polling place. That portion of the building will be cordoned off. So it's the high school gymnasium. And we're going for that specific day, that whole wing will not be utilized by students. And then at the end of the voting period, the custodial staff will do a deep cleaning of that area so that we can resume using it once it's disinfected.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks.
So on that, I think right now it's Superintendent's Conference Day. I know you had mentioned changing it to possibly being an instruction day. I was just looking at our agenda. It doesn't look like we approved that tonight. So.
Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, I had, I'm making the recommendation that due to the uncertain future with regard to the possibility of having to close school for a day here or there while the Suffolk County Department of Health conducts contact tracing. And that's with regard to future cases, which will likely be the case, whether we like it or not.
Yep.
I'm putting it seems logical to put a premium on instructional days. And so I'm recommending that our Superintendent's Conference Day, originally scheduled for November 2nd, be a regular day of instruction. The second reason why I think that's a prudent recommendation is that Superintendent's Conference Days usually have faculty and staff meet together, and the prohibition with regard to congregation and social distancing doesn't allow us to do that. So I don't believe that the conference day would be as productive as it normally would. So for those two reasons, I'm recommending that November 2nd go from being a Superintendent's Conference Day to a regular instructional day.
Probably need to make that change tonight, right? Do we have another board meeting between now and then?
I don't
We do
believe
not. The
we do.
meeting is that day. So hearing that, Jeff, from Jeff, board thoughts or comments on that?
Makes
No-brainer.
sense.
Yeah,
Do we need to formally vote on it or no?
I believe the date is November 3rd for the superintendent's conference day.
correct, which is election day. Our meeting's the 2nd, so we could either do that this evening or in anticipation of that, because the next meeting's the 2nd, which is the Monday. The conference day would be the Tuesday.
Yeah, I think if we're going to do it, we have to do it now because people need to know whether their kids need to go to school the next day.
Right. Exactly.
Um,
It would be smart. So is there a motion to change the superintendent's conference date to a regular educational day, which is November 3rd of 2020?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Board
Second.
discussion.
I just wanted to though, so okay, I hadn't put it totally together that our district was a polling place. So it would be using the district as a polling place. And I know in past, and forgive me, I'm just not all that up on that, but I know in the past there have been, many schools against being used as polling places because of security issues. Now we have, with kids in the building at the same time, now we have an added layer of the pandemic. I do think we should be prioritizing instruction, but I'm just thinking this out loud right now about kind of.
It's isolated to the gymnasium. It's on a remote day, so we're talking half. We're not talking a full impact. So I would be in support of changing that day to an instructional day, even with the school gymnasium being a polling place.
Would it make sense at all for that week only for moving the Tuesday learners to a Wednesday?
No, it gets too complicated in my mind.
I
Right.
agree.
There's still people there every day. So it only affects 3
Correct.
days. Okay. Are we going to then also potentially need to hire more security and like temperatures just for everyone coming in? Like, I guess we can't take people's temperatures to vote.
No, I don't believe, obviously your thinking is logical and makes sense, but I think the way it works is that they will enter, they being the people who are voting and the polling employees will enter off the Germain Street lot. The rest of the building will be blocked off. So they'll enter as you would for a normal high school basketball game. They'll go into the gymnasium, they'll vote, and then they will leave. And as in past years, we'll have to mark off parking spaces. And, so that people can park. But as per my previous comments, I had written them more than a month ago and called them 4 or 5 months ago, requesting that we not be used as a polling place because of the concerns that you noted, both the security and now the added COVID. I did not get a response. So we're at where we're at, and I'm going to make that request again after this election. But my plan had been to make the request, get a response from the Suffolk County Board of Elections, and then go to the Board of Education and let you make the choice. I still plan on doing that moving forward.
Great. I think I'm all for it. The only other thing to consider, and I just don't know how many students we have that are over 18 in the building, but do we just want to kind of talk to them about how it impacts their voting plan at all if they have to be in school that day, or just make some sort of accommodation, like, to allow them to.
Yeah, I can speak with our attorneys about what we can ask of them legally.
You can.
In other words, can I ask them to vote from 3 o'clock onwards, or is that a violation of their voting rights?
You're not going to be able to do that.
You're
in
not
my
gonna be
mind.
able.
That's my point. So I just think let's not call it an absence if they're absent or something like that. Like, just we have to make accommodations.
Right.
Polls are open till 9 p.m.
Yeah.
Okay, so any more discussion, or if not, let's vote. Okay. Mary, should we take the vote orally, or do you want to vote through the docs?
I don't know how to place that on. It's not.
Perfect. So let's we'll just vote orally. I'm in favor.
I favor.
I'm in favor.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? It carries unanimously. Great. Item 10.1, public input. Is there anyone from the public that would like to ask questions or make a comment based on anything at this point? Just please raise your hand or put your question into the chat room. Mr. Fisher, are there any hands?
I don't see any hands.
And I don't see any questions in the chat room. Okay, so moving on to item 11.1, which is a proposed motion to convene into executive session to discuss a contractual obligation and the employment of a particular person. Before we vote on that, should the motion carry and we go into executive session, when we exit executive session, the board will not be taking any action other than closing the hearing. With that, is there a motion for item 11.1?
So moved.
Second.
Second,
Great. Any discussion? None. Mary, if you could open up the voting, please. Thank you.
Anonymous.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody. If the board could log into that executive session link, everyone else have a good evening and thank you very much.
Thank you.
thank you.